Evan Darlow had lived in the small cul-de-sac for barely 3 weeks when he first noticed the man next door. At first, it was nothing unusual, a glimpse of a face through a window, a shadow moving behind a curtain, or the sound of someone closing a door a little too softly. But the longer Evan stayed, the more the feeling grew, blooming inside him like a tightening knot. The man wasn't simply watching him. No, the man knew him, studied him, expected him. It began subtly. On the morning Evan was dragging a box of old books inside, the neighbor stepped out onto his porch. He was tall, narrow-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair combed flat against his head, and eyes that didn't blink nearly often enough. He wore a faded green sweater despite the late summer heat, and although he smiled politely, his gaze didn't match the expression. "You should be careful lifting that one," the man said, low and oddly calm. "You hurt your back when you were 19. The injury never healed properly." Evan froze, fingers tightening on the cardboard edges. His pulse jumped. He forced a small laugh to cover the sudden rush of panic clawing up his chest. Yeah, something like that," he replied. "I'm sorry, I don't think we've met. I'm Evan Darlow. Yes, of course." Evan's throat went dry. The neighbor didn't offer his own name. Instead, he gave a nod, then added, "I'm next door. If you need anything, I'm always watching." He paused. "I'm always around." But the slip had already happened. The smile on his face sharpened. Then he turned and disappeared into his house, shutting the door with a gentle click that felt deliberate, calculated. That night, Evan barely slept. He lay awake listening to the creaks of settling wood and the hum of the refrigerator, each sound slipping into his thoughts. His past, especially the things he'd taken great care to leave behind, was not something anyone should have known, least of all a stranger. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe the neighbor had overheard him talking. Maybe he had looked something up online. But the injury at 19, only 3 people had ever known that story, and none of them were anywhere near this town. Still, he pushed it out of his mind. New neighborhoods always came with odd people. He couldn't move again so soon, not after what had happened before, not after everything he'd spent years burying. He forced himself to focus on unpacking, cleaning, and trying to rebuild the quiet, predictable life he desperately craved. But the peace didn't last. The second encounter came 2 days later. Evan was taking out the trash when the neighbor appeared again, materializing out of the quiet evening like he had been waiting just behind the fence. His sweater was the same. His eyes, dark, still, unblinking, settled immediately on Evan. "You forgot the envelope beneath your mattress, the one with the photos. I assume you'll get to it eventually." Evan froze mid-step. Every muscle in his body seized. His breath caught in his throat. He felt his pulse hammering in the side of his neck. The envelope was his private shame, a sealed collection of memories he had never been able to burn. He'd moved houses 3 times, lived in 2 different states, worked under a new name for a time, all to keep that part of his life behind him. No one, absolutely no one, should have known that envelope existed. "How do you—" Evan began, but the man cut him off softly. "It's tucked on the left corner. You always hide things on the left side. You've done that since you were a boy." A chill sliced through Evan's spine. He backed away, gripping the trash bag so tightly the plastic stretched and crackled. "Stop talking like you know me." The neighbor didn't blink. He simply tilted his head, observing Evan as though he were something pinned under glass. "You're nervous. You always get uncomfortable when someone brings up your past, don't you? I understand." His smile thinned. "After all, you've spent so long pretending it never happened." The blood drained from Evan's face. He turned and hurried back toward his house, leaving the trash bag half-tossed in the bin. His hands trembled as he fumbled with the door lock, shoving himself inside and slamming it shut. His breathing came in short, fractured bursts. He leaned back against the wall, pressing a hand against his chest to steady the panicked thudding beneath. He tried to make sense of it. He tried to reason. Maybe the neighbor had gone through his things somehow. Maybe he had broken in without leaving trace. That thought alone was more horrifying, but at least it was possible. The alternative, that the man knew everything already, was too disturbing to entertain. For the rest of the night, Evan stayed locked inside, every light on, curtains drawn. He didn't risk approaching any windows, not even for a second. Yet, despite his precautions, he felt watched, followed, observed. It was as if the neighbor's presence seeped into the walls of his home, a silent pressure settling across the rooms. Just before midnight, his phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "Don't worry, I won't tell anyone, not unless I have to." Evan's stomach twisted. He paced the living room, running his hair through his hair, panic rising again. After several minutes, he forced himself to check his security cameras, praying the feed would be empty. It wasn't. There, just within the reach of the porch light, the neighbor stood motionless at the edge of Evan's yard. His face was partly in shadow, sweater blending into the dark. His posture was rigid, hands held calmly at his sides. He wasn't doing anything. He wasn't approaching. He was simply watching. The camera timestamp read 12:07 a.m. Evan's breath shuddered. He turned off the feed immediately, but the image burned itself into his mind. Those unblinking eyes, that expressionless half-smile, the stillness that felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. The next morning, Evan decided he had to confront him. He waited until daylight, mustering the courage. He tried to convince himself this was all a misunderstanding, or maybe the neighbor was mentally unstable, or maybe Evan was overreacting. The longer he hesitated, the more he doubted his own judgment. That fear, the fear of confronting a nightmare directly, ate at him until he forced himself to step outside. The neighbor was already standing on his porch as if he expected him. "Good morning, Evan," he smiled pleasantly. "You slept poorly. You always toss your blanket to the right when you get nightmares." Evan's skin crawled. He approached slowly, stopping at the edge of the driveway. "How do you know these things?" he demanded, his voice shaking with frustration and fear. "What did you do? Did you break into my house? Did you follow me here? Who are you?" The man blinked once, slowly, delicately, as if mimicking a gesture he didn't fully understand. "You moved here to escape, but your past is still with you. I've known about you long before you bought this house." His smile tightened again. "Before you changed your name, before you buried what you did." A cold ripple of terror washed over Evan, his breath caught in his throat. "You don't know anything," Evan whispered. "Oh, I know everything." The world seemed to tilt. Evan staggered back, nearly losing his footing. The neighbor's expression didn't change. He didn't laugh, didn't taunt. He simply stated the words with chilling finality, as though he were reciting a fact as immutable as gravity. Then the neighbor leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "And Evan, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to remind you." Evan's heart pounded so violently it hurt. "Remind me of what?" The man smiled, his eyes darkening. "What you really are." And with that, he closed his door gently, leaving Evan standing alone in the sunlight, trembling, confused, and terrified in a way he hadn't felt since the darkest year of his life. Evan didn't leave the house for the rest of the morning. He kept pacing from room to room, replaying the neighbor's words over and over until they knotted into a heavy fist in the pit of his stomach. The sunlight outside did nothing to cut through the coldness spreading through him. Every curtain felt too thin. Every shadow seemed too deep. Every sound carried the weight of someone listening. He double-checked the locks, twice, then again. He checked the windows, pressing both palms against the glass as if confirming they were real, that they were still barriers between him and the man next door. But the reassurance lasted only seconds before the panic returned, crawling up his spine. He felt as though the neighbor's eyes followed him, sliding across the walls, settling on the back of his neck each time he turned away. Eventually, Evan forced himself to sit at the kitchen table, gripping a mug of barely warm coffee. He couldn't stop shaking. His mind drifted to the envelope beneath his mattress, the thing he wished he had burned years ago. He pictured the photos inside, the letters, the newspaper clippings, the evidence of a life he had tried so hard to obscure, a life he hoped no one could ever trace back to him. But someone had. someone sitting right next door. He pushed the mug away sharply, unable to swallow another sip. He needed answers, needed to understand what was happening or why. More than anything, he needed to prove to himself that the neighbor wasn't something worse than a stalker, worse than a trespasser. He needed to prove that this nightmare was at least rooted in normal reality. His phone buzzed. The number was unknown again. With a trembling thumb, Evan opened the message. "You're not alone in the house. Don't go upstairs." A cold wave of dread slammed into his chest. His breath froze. His fingers turned numb. The kitchen blurred around him. He stared at the message, rereading it again and again as if a different meaning might appear. His mind raced. He had locked every door, every window. He had walked through the house. It was empty. Wasn't it? He stood up slowly, every muscle rigid. The air in the hallway felt suddenly colder, almost metallic. The staircase loomed ahead, shadowed, its railing stretching up into the dimness of the second floor like a skeletal spine. He listened. At first, he heard nothing but the pounding of his own heart, loud, insistent, drowning out everything else. Then, faintly, a soft creak sounded overhead. His throat tightened. Someone or something had stepped on the floorboards above. "No," he whispered to himself. "No, no." He backed away from the stairs, eyes fixed upward, pulse racing faster and faster. Another sound followed, a slow, deliberate drag of fabric across wood, like someone shifting their weight or turning quietly in place. He forced himself to speak, though his voice cracked. "Who's there?" Silence. Then, bang! A loud, violent slam erupted from upstairs. Something heavy had struck the bedroom door. Evan stumbled backward, nearly crashing into the wall. His breath came in short, sharp bursts, and panic clawed at his chest with white-hot intensity. Another bang followed, louder, shaking the walls. He felt the vibration beneath his feet. His phone buzzed again. "Don't go up. You won't like what you see." Evan stared at the message, a fresh wave of terror flooding through him. He wanted to scream, wanted to run. Every instinct in him demanded escape, but the front door felt impossibly far away, and the shadows on the staircase stretched towards him like accusing fingers. He forced himself to move, inching towards the living room, gripping the phone tightly as if it were a lifeline. He needed to call someone, the police, anyone. As he dialed 911, a sudden, unbearable silence fell over the house. The banging stopped. The footsteps stopped. The air turned still. Too still. 911, what's your emergency? A voice said through the phone. Evan swallowed hard, his throat dry. There's someone in my house, upstairs. Please send someone. Are you able to leave the home safely? The operator asked. He glanced at the staircase again. A soft whisper drifted down, a whisper of his own name. Evan. He froze. It was his voice. Someone upstairs was imitating him. No. Sir, are you able to exit safely? I'm trying, he said, his voice trembling. But as he moved towards the front door, another whisper came, this time louder, clearer. Evan, don't leave. You're supposed to stay. Every hair on the back of his neck rose. His skin prickled. His stomach twisted violently. He reached the door, hand shaking as he grabbed the handle. That's when the neighbor's voice came through the phone. Clear, crisp, too close. You're making a mistake, Evan. Evan's blood turned to ice. The operator's voice vanished. The line went dead. And the neighbor, the man next door, spoke again through the speaker, calm and measured, as if he were saying something casual over a cup of tea. You should check the bedroom first. Evan threw the phone away in panic, letting it clatter across the hardwood floor. He yanked the door open and sprinted outside, chest heaving, adrenaline flooding through him with blinding force. He didn't stop running until he reached the sidewalk, several houses down. He turned, gasping, staring at his house. His vision blurred, his legs shook. He expected to see someone at the window, a shadow, a figure, something. But nothing moved. The house was silent, still, deceptively calm. He looked towards the neighbor's house next, the narrow, neatly kept home with the green sweater man inside. The neighbor was already on his front porch, standing perfectly still, hands resting lightly on the railing. He stared at Evan with the same unblinking, unreadable expression. "I warned you. You always run when things get close," he said softly. Evan's fists clenched. "What did you do? Are you in my house?" The neighbor tilted his head slightly. "No, not me." Evan swallowed hard. "Then who is—" "You know. You've always known. You're simply afraid to admit it." Evan trembled, unable to look away from him. The tension between them stretched like a wire pulled tight enough to snap. "What do you want from me?" Evan asked, his voice cracking with fear and anger. "Nothing," the neighbor said. "I'm just here to watch, to remind, to make sure you don't lie to yourself anymore." Evan's breathing faltered. "About what?" he asked. The neighbor's calm expression shifted, just barely, into something darker, something knowing. What happened that night? Evan's heart seemed to stop. The neighbor's voice softened, but it held a sharpness beneath the surface. "You've been running for years, but your past caught up the moment you moved here." He gestured towards Evan's home. "And someone upstairs remembers you much better than I do." Evan felt the world tilt under him. The neighbor took one slow, deliberate step towards the edge of his porch. "You can run again," he said quietly, "but you know how that ends." Evan backed away, shaking his head. "Stay away from me." The neighbor smiled. "Evan, I'm not the one you should be afraid of." And with that, he turned and went back inside, shutting the door behind him, leaving Evan alone, trembling in the sunlight, staring at a house that now felt impossibly wrong. Something was inside, something that knew him, something that whispered in his voice. And the worst part, the part he could barely admit even to himself, was that a small, buried part of him knew exactly who it was. The storm rolled in just after midnight, draping the neighborhood in a curtain of restless wind and uneasy darkness. I sat in my dimly lit living room, trying to shake the feeling Mrs. Calloway had left me with earlier, but her words lingered like smoke you could taste in the back of your throat. Every patter of rain against the windows felt like fingers tapping insistently, trying to pull my attention outside. I tried to watch television and read a book, then scroll on my phone, but none of it helped. The silence between the storm's bursts felt wrong, heavy, as though the entire house was leaning closer, waiting for something. It started with the old pipes clicking in the walls, an ordinary sound I had heard before. Only tonight the rhythm felt deliberate, like a coded sequence, as if something inside the walls was trying to communicate. At first, I told myself the storm was causing it, but the pattern repeated, sharper now, echoing in a disturbingly human cadence. I muted the television and slowly set the remote down, realizing the house was far too quiet for the noise to be anything natural. The clicking faded, replaced by a faint dragging sound like fingertips grazing along drywall. My breath caught in my chest, and the hairs on my neck rose before I even fully understood why. I stood up and turned slowly, following the sound as it slid along the walls behind me, tracing the shape of the living room perimeter. The dragging stopped just behind my left shoulder on the other side of the wall, as if someone were standing there, matching my height, mirroring my movement. A knot formed in my stomach as I stepped back, but the sound followed, staying perfectly aligned with me. I whispered, "No, no, no," under my breath, my voice trembling so lightly I barely recognized it. The storm outside surged, lightning flashing, illuminating the room in stark white light before plunging it back into shadow. I approached the wall slowly, holding my breath as though it might disturb whatever was lurking behind it. I pressed my ear to the plaster, feeling the cool surface against my skin. For a moment, there was only silence, stretched tight and terrifying. Then something on the other side tapped, twice, gentle and intentional, directly against the place where my ear rested. I jerked back, stumbling over the coffee table, sending a glass crashing to the floor. My heart hammered violently against my ribs, and for the first time since moving in, I saw the house for what it truly was. Not a place of shelter, but a container, something built to hold whatever was inside of it. The dragging began again, only now it was moving away from the living room, traveling down the hallway with slow, deliberate strokes. I felt a burst of cold air brush across the room, though no window was open and no door had moved. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, the narrow beam cutting through the dimness as I stepped toward the hall. It felt like walking into a throat, narrow and suffocating, each step weighted with dread. The shadows along the walls rippled, not with the flicker of light, but as though something beneath the surface was shifting, pressing outward. At the far end of the hallway, near the door of the spare bedroom I never used, the dragging stopped abruptly. The house fell silent again, so completely that even the storm seemed to hold its breath. I approached the spare room door slowly, each step sounding far too loud in the stillness. The door was ajar by an inch, though I knew I had left it fully closed. I reached out to push it shut, wanting to seal whatever nightmare lay beyond it. But before my fingers touched the wood, a whisper slipped out from the darkness inside the room, a whisper that was unmistakably my name. Evan. My body froze solid. The voice was soft, wavering, and agonizingly familiar, a voice I had not heard in years, one I should have never heard again. It belonged to my mother. A warmth spread through my chest, a cruel mixture of longing and terror, because I knew this was impossible. She was gone. She had been gone for a long time. Yet the whisper came again, dragging out the syllables in that gentle, broken way she used when calling me after a nightmare. The sound scraped across something deep inside me, a childhood instinct to come when called, to seek her comfort. But what waited inside that room was not her. The house shifted around me, timbers groaning, floorboards shivering under my feet as though something immense and unseen moved through them. The whisper deepened, stretching into something less human, yet it still clung to the shape of her voice. Evan, don't ignore me. A chill swept through the hall, so sharp it felt like invisible hands sliding across my skin. My flashlight flickered, sputtering against the darkness, and for a moment the spare room's interior lit up just enough to reveal a silhouette standing perfectly still in the far corner. It was the shape of a woman, head tilted, arms at her sides, watching me. The light failed completely. Darkness swallowed the hall, thick and suffocating. I stepped back, trying not to breathe too loudly, my fingers shaking uncontrollably around the phone. A soft thump sounded from inside the room, like a bare foot touching the floor. Then another, and another, each step slow and steady, advancing toward the door. I scrambled backward, nearly tripping over myself as I retreated toward the living room. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the hallway for a split second, and in that flash I saw the silhouette now closer, standing just inside the doorway, head still tilted, as though studying me with a grotesque curiosity. The lights in the house suddenly flared back on, blinding and yellow, banishing the shadows. The spare room was empty. No figure, no movement, no sound. But the door was now wide open and deep scratches had appeared along the inside of the frame, fresh enough that flakes of wood dust drifted to the floor. I stood frozen, breath ragged, unable to accept what I had just witnessed. Something in this house knew my past intimately, down to the voice of the woman who raised me. Something in this house wanted me to step inside that room, and something in this house was no longer content to stay hidden behind the walls. because tonight, the walls had started whispering, and they had whispered my name. The next morning came too quickly, arriving with a smear of gray dawn that did nothing to warm the house or the unease gripping my nerves. I barely slept. Every time I drifted off, I jolted awake to the faint memory of footsteps approaching the bed, or the soft echo of my mother's voice whispering just behind my ear. I hadn't heard anything after the lights came back on, but the silence had become its own torment, thick with a presence I could feel but not see. By sunrise, I couldn't stand to be in the spare room hallway anymore, so I barricaded the door with a dresser before forcing myself outside. The air was damp, carrying the scent of wet soil and old leaves. Across the street, I noticed movement in Mrs. Calloway's window. Her curtains twitched aside, revealing her pale face, watching me with that same worried intensity she always seemed to have. The moment she realized I noticed her, she disappeared into the house. A few seconds later, her front door creaked open, and she stepped out, waving me over with urgency instead of her usual slow, careful gestures. "You shouldn't be out here," she said the moment I reached her porch, her voice low and trembling. "It listens." The way she said it made my skin crawl. I asked her what she meant, but she only shook her head, glancing past me toward my house as if expecting something awful to appear in the doorway at any second. Her fear was contagious, seeping into my bones. "I heard something last night," I finally admitted, "in the walls and in the spare room." Her expression changed instantly, collapsing into a look of grim recognition. She ushered me inside, locking the door behind us with shaking hands. Her house smelled like lavender and old books, a stark contrast to the stale, oppressive air in mine. She walked into the kitchen and motioned for me to sit at the small square table before placing a steaming cup of tea in front of me. But she didn't sit. She paced. "You should have never bought that house, Evan. None of you should have." The word "you" snagged my attention. "You mean the people before me?" She stopped pacing. Her shoulders sagged. "There were families before them too, and before that the land was empty. People avoided it even before the first house was built." She swallowed hard, wringing her hands. "Do you know why your real estate agent pushed you through the sales so quickly? Why he didn't let you tour the basement? Why the house was so cheap?" A weight settled in my stomach. "Why?" "Because the walls aren't the problem. It's what's under the house." Her voice was barely audible now, as if afraid the thing she spoke of might hear her even from across the street. I leaned in, tension coiling around me like a net. She took a deep breath. "They built your house on top of something old, something that was buried or maybe trapped. No one really knows, but whatever it is, it mimics, it learns, it uses voices of the living and the dead to get what it wants, to get someone inside that locked room." My blood turned cold. "You know about the spare room?" She nodded. "They all had one, the families. The room that must stay locked. It isn't a bedroom, though they made it look like one later. It was originally a containment space, something meant to keep the influence from spreading." I felt the tea cooling between my hands, untouched. "I heard my mother's voice last night." Mrs. Calloway sank into the chair across from me, her eyes glassy with sadness. "That's how it works. It feeds on grief, on memory, on longing. It digs around in the parts of your mind that you hope no one ever sees, and it uses what it finds there to pull you in." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she was being dramatic, but the memory of the whisper, soft as breath and shaped exactly like my mother's, made denial impossible. I steadied my voice as best I could. "What happened to the families before me?" She flinched. "Most of them left, abandoned the house and everything in it. A few weren't so lucky. The last owner before you, a man named Grayson, disappeared. They never found him. Only," she stopped, teeth sinking into her lower lip as if deciding whether to continue, "only scratches inside the spare room." A chill ran through me so deep it felt like something icy had wrapped itself around my spine. But if the room is supposed to contain it, why is it trying to get me in there? Mrs. Calloway leaned forward, lowering our voice until it was almost a hiss. Because once you enter willingly, the barrier breaks, the protection fails, and whatever is beneath the floorboards can finally reach you. My breath faltered, the enormity of her words settling across me like a lead blanket. I felt my heartbeat thundering in my chest, each beat painful and frantic. What do I do? How do I stop it? She hesitated, and that hesitation was more terrifying than anything she had said yet. You can't stop it, not entirely, but you can slow it down. There are markings, old symbols carved into the basement beams. They were part of the original construction, reinforcements. The families before you would recarve them every year to keep the thing quiet. Grayson never did. That's why. She headed halfway. You need to find those markings and you need to restore them before tonight. My breath caught. Why tonight? Her voice croaked. Because once it speaks in a voice you trust, a voice you love, it won't stop. And if you heard your mother last night, then tonight it will come back stronger. It will try to call you again, and you must not answer. The storm clouds outside, long gone since morning, suddenly returned in full force, darkening the sky as thunder rumbled in the distance. A gust of wind slammed against the house, rattling the windows. Mrs. Calloway gripped my wrist, her fingers cold and desperate. Evan, listen to me. You have to go into your basement before dark. Find the symbols, restore them, seal the spare room, and whatever you do, if it speaks again, if it calls your name, do not respond. Do you understand? I nodded, though my body felt numb, like I was hearing instructions for my own burial. As I stood to leave, she followed me to the door, opening it just enough for me to slip outside. She didn't cross the threshold, didn't dare step into the open air between her home and mine. The moment I stepped off her porch, she whispered one last warning, her voice trembling. It knows you went looking for answers, and it won't like that. So go home quickly, do what you must, because the house is awake now, Evan, and once night falls, it will want you back. By the time I stepped back into my house, the sky had already darkened into a bruised purple, the sun barely clinging to the horizon. The air inside felt heavier than before, thick with a hushed anticipation, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for night to fully settle. I closed the front door slowly, listening to the house shift around me in small, unsettling creaks, each one pulsing with intelligence. The quiet was so dense it seemed to press into my ears, muting the world outside. I had never felt so watched, so deeply intruded upon. I forced myself toward the basement door, which stood slightly open, though I knew without question that I had shut it earlier. The seam of darkness beyond the doorway looked like a mouth, open and waiting, swallowing the dim light around it. Every instinct screamed for me to run, but Mrs. Calloway's warning echoed in my mind, before tonight. My hand trembled as I wrapped my fingers around the doorknob, the metal cold enough to sting my palm. I flicked on the light, though the bulb at the bottom of the stairs flickered with a weak yellow pulse, barely illuminating the concrete steps below. Descending felt like sinking into a void. The air grew colder, and the smell of damp earth mixed with something far older, metallic and sour, like old blood that had seeped into stone. The house groaned above me, long, slow breaths rolling through the beams. When I reached the basement floor, the light flickered again, and for a moment, total darkness swallowed everything. I felt panic rise in my throat, but the light steadied, dim but present. I exhaled shakily and moved forward, searching the wooden support beams for anything resembling marks or symbols. It didn't take long to find them. Faint lines carved into the wood, faded almost to nothing, as though time itself had tried to erase them. They were arranged in patterns I didn't understand, looping and intersecting in strange angles that hurt my eyes if I stared too long. Some were shallow scratches, others were deep, deliberate incisions. I knelt, running my fingers over them, feeling the edges where they once must have been sharp and strong. Now they were dying, and the air trembled around them like the house was aware I had found its secret. A soft thump echoed from upstairs, then another. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, and impossibly heavy. My chest tightened. Someone or something was walking through my home. I forced myself to stay focused, pulling the small utility knife from my pocket. My hands shook violently as I began recarving the first symbol, following its lines as best as I could remember. Wood shavings drifted to the ground in thin curls. The moment the symbol's lines became whole again, a low vibration shuddered through the floor, like the house had reacted, like something beneath it had recoiled. The footsteps upstairs stopped abruptly. I froze, breath trapped in my throat, my ears strained against the oppressive silence. Then slowly, a new sound drifted down from above, a soft dragging, as though someone were pulling their fingers along the walls of the hallway again. It grazed the plaster with gentle insistence, traveling toward the basement door. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I forced myself to continue, carving the next symbol as quickly as I could without ruining its shape. My vision blurred from fear, my grip nearly slipping on the knife. Halfway through the second symbol, a whisper floated down the stairs, fragile and trembling, the voice that had haunted me for years. "Evan, sweetheart, please come upstairs. Please, I'm scared." My entire body locked. It was my mother's voice again, soft, warm, full of the gentle love I had spent years longing for. The knife slipped, slicing the tip of my finger. Blood welled instantly, but I didn't move, didn't breathe. The whisper grew stronger, clearer, dripping with emotion. "Please, Evan, I need you. Don't leave me alone." My throat burned, tears rising without permission. The voice was perfect, down to the small quiver she had when she cried. But beneath the softness was something else, something greedy and ancient, coiling around the edges like rot beneath paint. I clenched my teeth so hard my jaw ached. My fingers trembled violently as I finished the second marking, carving the final line with a shaky slash. Another tremor rolled through the beams, deeper this time, almost like a growl beneath the floor. The footsteps upstairs resumed, now moving faster, shifting from walk to near run. Cabinets slammed in the kitchen, door frames shook. Something was furious. The house itself seemed to pulse with agitation, radiating a suffocating pressure that made it hard to breathe. "You're hurting me," the voice whimpered, cracking with false despair. "Why are you doing this to me, Evan?" I forced myself to ignore it, wiping tears from my eyes with the back of my hand. I moved to the last beam where the largest symbol was nearly erased. Every line had faded to ghost-thin scratches. As I pressed the blade to the wood, the house erupted into chaos above me. Footsteps thundered across the floor. Something heavy crashed to the ground. Walls shook violently, dust raining from the ceiling. The voice above shifted, deepening, warping, as if shedding its disguise. "Evan!" The basement light exploded overhead, plunging me into darkness. I dropped to the floor, choking on dust and fear. The voice now echoed with inhuman resonance, vibrating through the entire house in a grotesque parody of rage. "Open the door!" Not the basement door, the spare room door, the one I had barricaded. My heart seized. I slashed at the final symbol, carving through the dark blindly, guided only by memory and desperation. The thunder of footsteps grew louder, closer, descending the stairs now, each step shaking the ground beneath me. The air thickened, turning cold enough to numb my skin. My breath poured out in pale bursts. "Evan!" The voice called again, now nearly beside me, softening, seductive, pleading. "If you finish that, you'll lose me forever. You don't want that, do you? You miss me. I know you do. Let me in. Let me be with you again." I screamed, not at the voice, but at the last stroke, driving the blade into the wood with every ounce of strength I had left. The moment the symbol completed, a violent crack tore through the basement. The ground trembled, the air shattering like a sound stone splitting open. A guttural scream ripped through the house, not human, not anything of this world, raw, enraged, defeated. A shockwave blasted through the room, knocking me backward. I hit the floor hard, ears ringing, lungs burning. Then, silence. Pure, total, suffocating silence. When I finally dared to open my eyes, the basement was still. The air was warmer. The crushing weight pressing down on my chest was gone. I crawled to my feet, shaking uncontrollably, and stumbled up the stairs. Every room was trashed, cabinets open, furniture overturned, walls cracked, but nothing moved, nothing whispered. The house felt empty, truly empty for the first time since I had moved in. I walked down the hall toward the spare room. The barricade was untouched, the door still firmly blocked. Whatever had tried to escape or enter hadn't made it through. Outside, dawn was breaking again. By mid-morning, I had packed every bag I owned. I didn't look back as I left the house, not once. Mrs. Calloway watched from her window, relief softening her expression as I drove away. I will never return to that house, not even to retrieve the things I left behind. Some places aren't meant to be lived in. Some places aren't meant to be touched at all. And sometimes, the things that mimic the people we love aren't trying to comfort us. They're trying to follow us home.